What up, gentlemen? And today we will be reviewing The Stranger by Albert Camus. I've also invested in a whiteboard, so I might try using that today. So, what to say about our man of the hour, Mr. Albert Camus? Well, Camus was born in French Algeria in 1913. Yeah, I know, just a content warning. There's going to be a lot of French people in this one. I'm sorry. He's technically a Pied Noir, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is slang for French people and other European descent born in North Africa. Camus was born and raised in Algiers, the now capital of Algeria. He was born in a poor neighborhood and studied philosophy at the University of Algeria. Camus was a pretty big-brained dude. He worked for a leftist newspaper, which was banned by the French government. He became pretty well known for his journalistic work and would catch the eye of a professor who would help him move away from Algeria and up to Paris. In Paris, he wrote his first works, including The Stranger. He has some pretty wild political beliefs. He was an anti-Stalinist socialist and is considered an anarcho-syndicalist, which is an awesome ideology name. Overall, Camus was anti-totalitarian. He spoke out against Soviet incursions in Eastern Europe, Francoist Spain, and colonial actions in French Algeria. He was also pro-European integration. Camus also joined the French Communist Party in early 1935, but left a year later to join the Algerian Communist Party, who were more pro-Algerian independence. He was later kicked from the Algerian Communist Party due to talks he was having with another nationalistic party in Algeria. Despite both parties being pro-independence, Camus was still kicked because the Communist Party didn't want Camus having relationships with, ideologies outside of their own. This led to Camus distrusting bureaucracies that aimed for efficiency over human justice. In World War II, Camus assisted the French resistance during Nazi occupation. His father also died in World War I, so Camus never met him. Later in life, Camus became very popular for his intellectual works, and in 1957 he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Absurdism is the adopted philosophical system of Camus. It states that the universe is irrational and meaningless, and that attempts to find meaning lead people into conflict with the world around them. Existence as a whole is absurd. The absurd essentially represents a contradiction or conflict, positing that the ultimate meaning of life is beyond the limits of rationality. This can obviously be a part of an existential crisis. Arguments for absurdism include that human life is meaningless due to our deaths. Nothing that we do today will matter millions of years later. Another argument says that all thinking is circular and thus irrational. The absurd is typically written about as something to be fought or reacted to. The absurd does exist, yes, but if we still want to have meaning in our lives, what can we do? The three discussed reactions to absurdism are suicide, belief in a higher cause, or rebellion against the absurd. Suicide is typically not advocated for because, duh, it's just seen as too permanent. Camus also insinuated that suicide is a confession that life is not worth living. Belief in a higher power also doesn't stop the problem. Camus referred to this as philosophical suicide because it cuts one off from acknowledging the truth. The absurd is not really beatable under any original solution, but this is just the equivalent of giving up other than, killing yourself. Rebellion is typically considered the most optimal. It involves not escaping the absurd and instead acknowledging it for what it is. Rebellion is close to existentialist concepts like authenticity or freedom. It emphasizes an obligation to take responsibility for one's actions and define your own essence. To Camus, the absurd means that humans are free. The search for meaning itself becomes the meaning of one's life. Revolting means divorcing oneself from life without leaving it. Thus, rebellion fights both the absurd and suicide. Critics say absurdism is morally nihilistic. This nihilistic approval could guarantee the worst aspects of human nature, as there can be no punishment or responsibility if nothing matters. Also, some see rebellion and other existentialist concepts like authenticity as contradicting the absurd. This is partly why Camus rejects nihilism and the label existentialism in other works, though in my opinion he's pretty similar to other existentialist philosophers. If there is any difference, absurdism reaffirms the futility of death, arguing that death itself invalidates most human achievement, while existentialists deny any sort of base human state to be followed in the first place. Absurdists also emphasize personal responsibility to others, while existentialists are more favorable to individual growth or projects. They both do believe that morality, as it is in their current era, is false in some sort of way, which makes them sound pretty similar. Getting to The Stranger, it was published in 1942 after being allowed by the Nazi-occupied government in France. Its name has to do with alienation, i.e. feeling like a stranger in one's own society. Interestingly, it also appears to be a self-insert for Camus. However, as we will discuss, it isn't really a nice one. It isn't fan fiction. It is primarily Camus masking his overall dislike for traditional opinions and humanity. The main character, Mersal, lives in Algiers just like how Camus grew up. Speaking of which, I guess I could use the whiteboard here. Okay, so here's Mersal. and we'll get more into him as we go on, but I've written a couple of personality traits already. Point is that both the main character and Camus have no relationship with their fathers, though in the book it isn't exactly stated why the main character's father is gone. It's interesting to see the correlation and possibly how Camus sees part of himself in the protagonist, despite him being kind of an asshole and possibly psychotic. That being said, let's actually get into The Stranger. The book opens with the line, "Maman is dead." We don't get to know her a lot, but she is the mother of our main character, Monsieur Mersal. Mersal is described initially as a pretty laid-back or uninterested guy, but we eventually see how this is kind of his entire personality. This uncaring nature will be used against him later. Mersal has to take a visit from Algiers to the old folks' home in Marengo where Maman was staying. There he makes small talk with the caretaker of the home. Mersal notices that the caretaker has a severe superiority complex, so to say. He seems to be on the same level as the patients of the home, both medically and physically, but because he is their caretaker, he has some level of power over them. This manifests in him being a busybody who is constantly keeping track of other people's problems. After talking to the caretaker, he files some paperwork with the director of the home and goes to see Maman's casket with the caretaker. So we have a couple other characters who I'll write down. We have the caretaker. The caretaker, like I said, is just a busybody. Just kind of a dick. Which is, I mean, I guess I wrote that for him too. That's the theme we'll see for a lot of these people. They kind of suck. Then we also have the director, which really isn't that important right now, but he'll come back later. He just owns the home. That's it. He just owns the home, the old folks' home. Upon entering her little mortuary, the caretaker goes to lift the casket, but Mersal stops him. He has no interest in seeing Maman. Now, we all grieve in lots of different ways, but Mersal is a strange cookie. In fact, he starts smoking with the caretaker around the casket just to pass the time. The caretaker says that Maman had many friends while at the home, and he had invited some of them in to see the casket later in the evening, and they start to arrive. Mersal sits with the elders and makes small notes of their mannerisms as they all sit in silence grieving Maman. He notices a woman crying, several people sucking on the sides of their mouth, and a man resting his hands and face on his cane. After an entire night of this, the elders one by one stand up, shake Mersal's hand, and leave. The next day, Mersal and the staff of the home meet in the town of Marengo for the proper funeral and burial. Before this, Mersal is asked one more time by the director if he wants to see Maman before the casket is tightened, but he refuses. The director also states that he allowed one patient from the home to attend the funeral with the rest of the staff. This man is Thomas Perez, a romantic partner Maman had taken, but whom Mersal had never known because he rarely, if ever, visited her at the home. I shall also write Thomas Perez on the board. Mr. Perez, once again, not too important right now, but he will come back, and he is just the lover of Maman when she was alive. This board is also really shaky, too, because I don't have it in right. I don't know. I'm doing my best. After meeting at the town church, the priest, hearse, pallbearers, director, Mersal, a nurse, and Perez all walk in the funeral procession in that order. Keep in mind this is Algeria, so as the sun rises, things get extremely hot, which affects some in the party. Mersal can only concentrate on going to the gravesite and is amazed at other people, like the director, who are seemingly taking the heat effortlessly. Seems like this guy is affected by the heat a little bit, but that won't come back. In his defense, Mersal is not the only one affected. Mersal keeps looking back at Perez and notices he is slowly losing his distance from the party. Eventually, Mersal looks back and Perez is just gone. He eventually notices that Perez had cut across a field and was going to a separate part of the road to catch up to the group. So drawing this, if the road is like squiggly like that, Perez is just so far behind, he is cutting across like the open countryside to catch up to the rest of the party. Keep in mind, Mersal does not do anything to help, and everyone else in the party either doesn't see or also doesn't do anything to help. So Perez is just forever trying to catch up to the funeral procession. Eventually the sun gets to Mersal fully, and he just kind of phases out, only describing the brief scenes of Perez's tears streaming across his face and getting caught in his wrinkles, Perez passing out, Maman being buried, and the bus ride back to Algiers. Once back in Algiers, Mersal makes it back to his flat and passes out himself, sleeping for 12 hours. After waking up, Mersal remembers that it is in fact a weekend and he wants to do something. Who cares that your mother is dead when you can party? And Mersal wants to do just that. Actually, he doesn't want to party. He wants to go to the beach and swim. There he runs into Marie, a typist from a former job he had. Marisol states that he and Marie were into each other at the job, but now that they are out of the workspace, they hold nothing back and start touching each other up in the water. So that's going to be our next main character, or important character. We got Marie, and Marie is going to be the love interest of Marisol, and vice versa. I'm actually going to draw an arrow between those two. Yeah, so you can kind of tell. I don't even know if you can read this board. I'm not going to lie, this whole thing may be worthless. Whatever. Eventually they both go back to shore, get dressed, and agree to go to the movies, where Marie notices Marisol is wearing a black tie, signifying he is currently in mourning. When Marie asks who it is for, Marisol replies, "It is for Maman, his mother, who died yesterday." Marie seems a little weirded out by this, obviously, but continues to go to the movies with Marisol. The two see a Fernandel film, which is basically a comedy movie, once again, all after the day of Maman's death. The next day goes by quickly, and Marisol heads back to work. While there, Marisol's boss asks how old Maman was, to which he responds with about 60 to not be incorrect. Later on break, Marisol hangs out with a work friend, Emmanuel, and goes to get food at Celeste, a cafe he frequents. Celeste is either the name of the restaurant or owned by Celeste, as both Marisol and the owner are close friends, and Marisol simply refers to it as Celeste. So we'll write his name down too, Mr. Celeste. Marisol lives in a flat with neighbors. While making his way back to his room, Marisol runs into his roommate, Salamino. Salamino is a man with reddish scabs on his face. He owns a dog with mange who he abuses constantly. He walks with his dog until he is tired and then forces it back. He doesn't give the dog enough time to urinate, and it has to walk while doing so. They haven't changed their routine in 8 years. Marisol remarks, "They look like the same species, and yet they hate each other." Other people describe their relationship as pitiful. So we'll put Mr. Salamino, or Salamano, down here as well. He just owns a dog. He owns and abuses dog. Marisol arrives as Salamano is swearing at the dog as they are going out for their evening walk. Right after that, the second neighbor, Raymond Sintes, comes in. People believe he is a pimp, but he always reaffirms he is a warehouse guard. Raymond is not very popular in the neighborhood, for obvious reasons. Marisol is really the only one who listens to him, and later he alludes to being part of the mob. Truly three class act people. Marisol, who may or may not be psychopathic, Salamano, who is known for abusing his dog, and Raymond, who is a pimp, and not to spoil anything, but also beats women. There is a recurring theme that all the people in this are just dicks. They have serious lives to themselves, but to everyone else, they are just strange and nonsensical. Actually, real quick, too, I need to put Raymond on the board because this man is also pretty important. He is, like I said, just a pimp. I would say all-around swell dude, but he's the opposite of that. He kind of sucks. Marisol starts a conversation with Raymond, who invites him to his flat. Raymond promises to cook blood sausage. They get drunk and smoke cigarettes while talking and eating. After spotting a bandage on Raymond's hand, Raymond tells Marisol he got into a fight with a man. He denies starting it, but eventually admits to Marisol that it was the brother of his former mistress. His mistress was a Moorish woman who Raymond believes was cheating, as she fully relied on him for money, but was still able to buy things he never knew about. This girl never is named, so I'll just call her the Moorish woman going forward. Upon coming to this conclusion, Raymond confronted the Moorish woman and beat her until she bled. It appears he abused her before, but never this bad. And the Moorish woman's brother, upon hearing of this, tried to seek Raymond out and fight him, only to lose. Raymond tells Marisol he still fancies the Moorish woman, but wants to punish her further. He considers branding her a prostitute or getting the mob to mark her, but settles on wanting Marisol to write a letter convincing her to come back, so Raymond can then kick her out on his own terms. Raymond did not think he could write the letter, but knew Marisol had the capacity to. Marisol seems hesitant, but is pushed to help Raymond as he sees no reason to disappoint him. This event makes Raymond and Marisol pals. They are best friends after this event. Outside of work, Marisol hangs out with Emmanuel and Marie. Marisol and Emmanuel go to the movies a couple times. Marisol notes that Emmanuel never understands what's going on. You always have to explain what is happening in the movie to him. This is what I noticed about Marisol. He is always able to pick out the traits of others and reflect upon them, like his analyzing of the people from the Marengo home, or the quirks of Emmanuel. But he rarely, if ever, does this with himself. One day Marie and Marisol swam together once again. Later they headed back to the flat to have lunch. There they hear Raymond talking softly with the Moorish woman from his room. Marisol and Marie continue to talk together during the evening. Marie asks Marisol if he loves her, and he tells her that he thought it didn't mean anything and essentially tells her no. Marisol notices that this disappoints Marie, because, of course, they have little time to dwell on it, though, as voices soon arise from Raymond's room as the Moorish woman and him start fighting. The woman screams as Raymond throws her out of his apartment. Soon people gather in the landing to find him on top of her, beating her. Marie tries to get Marisol to call the cops, but he refuses. Eventually, one is called by another bystander. The cop arrives, and Raymond lets the Moorish woman leave as she calls him a pimp. Marie leaves, and Marisol agrees to testify at Raymond's trial over the confrontation. Raymond does feel satisfied with his work and tells Marisol he is used to dealing with the cops. After this, Marisol and Raymond go into town and enjoy themselves, because, yeah, all in a day's work of just beating the shit out of people, I guess. Once arriving back at the apartment landing, they find Salamano in distress. Salamano's dog ran off while he was at the parade ground on their usual route. He slipped off of his collar and cannot be found. Salamano asks Marisol where he can look for his dog, and Marisol tells him he is likely at the pound, in which he will need to pay a fee to get him back. Salamano refuses to pay money for that bastard and leaves. Later, though, Salamano, looking distressed, talks with Marisol about the actions of the pound. Marisol tells him that the pound might put the dog down after a few days. Salamano leaves, and Marisol can hear him crying from the other room. At work, Raymond calls Marisol. He invites Marisol and Marie to his friend's beach cabin. I'm also just gonna, we may as well, I'm just gonna connect these two as well, because they really like each other at this point. Maybe even more than those two. Like, let's be real. Raymond also informs Marisol that a group of Arabs have been following him. They are friends of the Moorish woman's brother, who seem to be stalking Raymond. After this, Marisol is called in to talk with his boss. He fears it was the non-business related call, but his boss actually discusses opening an office in Paris where Marisol can work and move to. Marisol does not seem interested in this prospect. When his boss tells Marisol he has no ambition, Marisol realizes he hasn't had any ambition since he abandoned his studies in his youth. After work, Marisol and Marie talk further about this. Marisol tells Marie about the Paris option, and she seems to enjoy it. They also talk about marriage, but Marisol still seems distant to Marie. Marie leaves, and Marisol goes to eat at Celeste alone. While there, Marisol sits next to a calculated Swift woman who seems peculiar to him. She orders and pays very fast and appears to be keeping track of radio programs before leaving. That's all we get of her for now. At the flat, Marisol finds Salamano waiting outside his door. Salamano's dog was not at the pound. Marisol invites Salamano inside and they start discussing the dog. A friend of Salamano's bought the dog for him as a puppy after his wife died. Salamano notes that the dog's coat was his prettiest defining feature, but this was lost in old age. He accepts that the dog is lost and that his life is changed forever. Salamano also informs Marisol that many in the neighborhood dislike him after he moved Maman to the home. Marisol argues he didn't have the means to take care of Maman and that she enjoyed herself at the Marengo home. Salamano agrees to this and warms up to Marisol after the conversation. So yes, Salamano's dog is gone. So I guess I'll change this to, past tense, because this man has actually undergone a little bit of character development. Or at least he can't abuse his dog anymore, so that's good. The next day, Marie and Marisol wake up together and get ready to head to the beach. Marisol is very tired. Marie has to shake him awake and tells him he has a funeral face. Before leaving up, they meet up with Raymond and they catch a bus to get to the coast as soon as possible. Marisol recalls his testimony at Raymond's trial. Raymond got off with a warning due in part to Marisol's testimony. He said he believed the Moorish woman was cheating on Raymond, but Marisol seemed suspicious of his own claim, pointing out how the police never even examined it. While getting on the bus, the group notices the Arabs watching them. The Arabs are not following them, however, so they do not take it too seriously. Marie has an oilcloth bag, and the rest of the guys are carrying beach stuff, which likely tells the Arabs they are heading to the beach. They arrive at the coast and meet Mason, Raymond's friend who owns the beach bungalow, and his wife, who I will just call Madame Mason. At the beach house, Mason and his wife get along with Marisol, Marie, and Raymond. Marie and Madame Mason laugh, which makes Marisol warm up to the idea of marriage, maybe. Marisol, Marie, and Mason then go down to the beach to swim. They eventually lay out and sleep on the coastline. Marie wakes up before Marisol and informs him it is time for lunch. The group eats fish, meats, and potatoes. Marisol also ingests wine and smokes. Afterwards, the men separate from the women and walk on the shore away from the beach house. Coming the other direction, they find two of the Arabs who follow them. Upon meeting each other, Raymond and Mason start fighting the two Arab men. The group initially wins, but one of the Arabs draws a knife and cuts Raymond. The Arabs then flee, and the group goes back to the bungalow. At the bungalow, Madame Mason and Marie are very shaken, which troubles Marisol. Raymond goes to a doctor who patches him up and tells him the wounds will heal fine. When he comes back, Raymond is still angry and storms back to the beach, where Marisol follows him. The two men walk until they find the Arabs at a rock on the beach. Here Marisol notices that Raymond has one of his hands in his pockets. He has a gun he intends to use on the men. Marisol manages to talk him down and convinces Raymond to hand him the gun. He does promise to shoot the men for Raymond if they put up a fight. Raymond then charges the Arabs. In this moment, Marisol realizes it's either shoot or not shoot. The action he takes could affect his life for years to come. Fortunately, the Arab men flee behind the rock, and Marisol does not have to shoot. Marisol and Raymond then head back to the bungalow. Raymond enters, but Marisol cannot face the others. Marisol realizes once again it's either to stay or to go, and he heads back to the beach alone, this time with Raymond's gun. While walking along the shore, the sun starts to irritate him. It's like the day Maman was buried. Between the sunlight and the sweat pouring into his eyes, he can't concentrate on anything. While walking, he once again runs into an Arab near the rock. This time, it's just one man. The two are around each other in tense company, but when Marisol gets too close, the Arab man raises a knife to him. The glare from the knife goes straight into Marisol's eyes and makes him so tense and annoyed, he shoots the Arab. One shot immediately, and four more after realizing what he had done. The rest of the book now takes place as Marisol is in custody/prison. I'm also going to put Mason, I'll probably just put Mason up here. I'll just put Mason. He owned the bungalow. While in custody, Marisol is questioned by the magistrate. He is not taking his case seriously and does not even have a lawyer, which has to be assigned to him. Marisol meets his lawyer, who is described as a short and stubby but likable man. They discuss the day of Maman's death, as the prosecution is going to try and prove that Marisol's non-reaction to Maman dying was proof that he is a psychopath not capable of emotion. While talking to his lawyer, Marisol admits that he lost the need for self-reflection. He states he always puts his physical needs before his emotional ones. It seems he would rather Maman hadn't died, but he is not able to process this. This obviously upsets the lawyer, who leaves. After this, Marisol is questioned again by the magistrate. His lawyer is not able to be present at the moment, but Marisol still allows himself to be questioned. The magistrate states that people have been describing Marisol as tacited and withdrawn. Marisol does not deny this and responds, stating he just never has much to say and thus keeps quiet. When questioned about Maman, Marisol states that he loved her the same as anyone else. He is not able to answer why he paused between the first and second shot of the murder, which makes the magistrate very confused. The magistrate then pulls out a cross and attempts to relate to Marisol through the love of Christ, wanting him to repent for his sins. Marisol does not relate to this, which causes tension between the two. The magistrate doubles down and starts shouting at Marisol. Confused, Marisol starts blindly agreeing to his claims. He says he does this whenever he wants someone to go away. After being questioned about if he believes and puts his trust in God, Marisol answers no once again. After this, the magistrate gives up and seems very dejected. He tells Marisol, "I have never seen a soul as hardened as yours." The magistrate becomes withdrawn after this event with Marisol. It seems he came to a decision about the case. So with the magistrate, we have another person with a very strict worldview who has run up against the absurdity of whatever Marisol is. So two more characters we'll write down. We have basically the lawyer, who is just Marisol's lawyer, and the magistrate, who is basically another religious man. The investigation period lasted 11 months, and it appears Marisol is in prison for all of it. He recalls his time during this. At first he was put in a holding cell, mostly with Arab men. They laughed when first seeing him and asked what he was in for. Marisol responds with, "I killed an Arab," which got them to shut up. In the beginning, prison felt like waiting for Marisol. Marie visited him at first. On one occasion, they meet in a loud room, which separates the prisoners from their families through two large grates. So for example, there's this grate 1, grate 2, and then one side there's Marisol, and then the other side there is Marie. Due to the distance between the grates, everyone basically has to shout at each other. The couple next to Marie and Marisol were being especially loud. Marisol noted that most of the prisoners and their families were Arab. Marie still seems very interested in Marisol. She remains smiling the entire time while talking to him and tells Marisol he has to have hope he will be released and the two can get married. Marisol still wants Marie, but struggles to tell her this. Marie also tells him that Raymond sends his regards, which is both funny and sad. This man killed someone in your name, and you can't even visit him. Like, really? When the couple next to them is ordered to leave, the Arab man says, "Goodbye, Maman," to his lover. I don't fully know why Camus included this, likely just to show that Maman won't leave Marisol's life, even in prison, away from the outside world. Marisol begins to get annoyed by all the noise, but remains comfortable due to Marie. He is eventually ordered to leave, and Marie remains smiling at him and pressed against the bars of her grate while he is led away. After meeting with Marie, the days run together for Marisol. Marie eventually writes and tells Marisol she is not allowed to come in anymore because she is not his wife. He struggles not thinking like a free man. In the beginning, he wanted to walk on the beach, smoke, and long for women. The punishment of the cell made him learn to cope without having these things. Marisol develops a strategy of retracing the steps of his apartment to kill time. He also sleeps for 18 hours a day and reads the Czechoslovakian news story. This story is a newspaper clipping of a man who moved away from his hometown and got rich. His mother and sister then started a hotel together in the hometown. The traveler eventually returns to the town disguised and visits the hotel wanting to surprise his mother and sister. The mother and sister then killed him while he slept to steal his money. The next day, when his wife entered the hotel asking for his whereabouts, the mother and sister realized what they had done. After this, the mother hanged herself and the sister threw herself down a well. Marisol reads this and thinks that the traveler got what he deserved, because one should never play petty games. I don't know what to think of that one, just what the hell. After the investigation, Marisol's trial begins. His lawyer says it shouldn't take more than 3 days due to a patricide, which everyone considered more important. Patricide is when a man kills his father. I had to look that one up. Marisol does not seem shaken, but excited to go to court. When entering the courtroom, he steps into a large crowd and has informed the press have blown his story up due to a slow news season. In the courtroom, he sees a robotic reporter staring at him in a cold and calculated manner. Marisol states that this man reminds him of himself. He also sees the strange woman from Celeste and some of his friends in the crowd, including Marie, who waves at him. When questioned by the judge, Marisol says that Maman going to the home didn't bother him that much because they didn't expect much from each other. He also says that the unfortunate events of the day just happened that way and were not preordained. So then the prosecution brings in the director, the caretaker, and Thomas Perez from earlier. Starts with the director, who testifies that Marisol was very calm on the day of Maman's funeral. He didn't want to see her in the casket and never paid respects after she was buried. The director also states Marisol didn't know how old Maman was and she approached him multiple times for putting her in the home. The caretaker testifies and says similar things, including that Marisol smoked on the day of Maman's death. When the lawyer argues against this and is like, "Were you smoking too?" the caretaker is embarrassed and has to answer yes. Marisol recognizes this and blurts out that he was the one to offer the caretaker the cigarette. This does help the caretaker because, it wasn't his cigarette, but a bit of an awkward time to bring it up when you're on trial for murder. Maybe don't help the prosecution. Perez testifies next and says he didn't see Marisol crying the day of the funeral despite his own sadness. Recall him being left behind and passing out and all of that show. So now it's time for our defense to testify, which is Marie, Celeste, Salamano, Raymond, and Mason. Celeste is first up. He only says that Marisol is a man and that him being at the beach was bad luck before being reseated. Marie testifies and tells about the events of the day she hooked up with Marisol. She adds that it was only a day after Maman's passing. This visibly frustrates the prosecution and Marie starts crying and has to be ushered away. Celeste is first up. He only says that Marisol is a man and that him being at the beach was bad luck before being reseated. Marie testifies and tells about the events of the day she hooked up with Marisol. When asked by the prosecutor, she adds that it was only a day after Maman's passing. This visibly frustrates the prosecution and Marie starts crying and has to be ushered away. Mason testified that Marisol was an honest man, but at this point no one was listening and people were starting to turn against Marisol and his lawyer. Salamano also testified and said that Marisol was good with his dog, but same scenario. Raymond was the last to testify. He states that Marisol had no reason to be angry with the Arab. It was just by chance he was on the beach at the same time. Remember, the ordeal started because Raymond hit the Moorish woman. When pushed, Raymond adds it was also by chance Marisol wrote the letter which prompted the whole incident. The prosecution points out how Raymond is a procurer, or pimp, and Marsal never intervened or called the cops when he saw Raymond abusing the Moorish woman. To the prosecution, and likely everyone else, it seems like the murder is premeditated. Marsal lured the Moorish woman back to Raymond, which then riled up her brother and his guys enough to follow them out to the beach, where Marsal then shot either her brother or one of his friends. Add the whole Maman scene into things, and it seems like Marsal is just a really intelligent killer who isn't capable of feeling emotion. In my opinion, this isn't the strongest argument of all time, especially with where this goes. Keep in mind, we also have the direct thoughts of Marsal, and no, he wasn't thinking ahead of time. Back in the courtroom, Marsal starts to realize that the trial is not going well for him, but things are adjourned for the day, and he is returned to prison. Marsal covers the rest of the trial fairly quickly. The prosecutor keeps trying to prove that the murder was premeditated. He also calls Marie his mistress, which annoys Marsal. The prosecutor continues to judge Marsal as intelligent and without emotion. Marsal seems to not pay very close attention to either the prosecution or his lawyer. He claims that the trial tires him out. He does listen, however, when the prosecution then states that Marsal's distance from his mother's death is the equivalent to the patricide case. The prosecutor claims to look into Marsal's soul and find nothing. Never once has Marsal been apologetic or shown remorse for what he did. He conceives of Marsal as a monster. The prosecutor then declares to the judge, "I ask you for this man's head." He wants Marsal to be guillotined as punishment for his crime. This riles Marsal up, and he tries arguing against himself against the lawyer's instructions, but no one takes him seriously. You likely already realize this, but Marsal realizes that the lawyer's defense is not as good as the prosecution. The lawyer is just pretty inexperienced and terrible altogether. When the prosecution said he peered into Marsal's soul, the lawyer said he did the same and read it like a book. He claims Marsal is a hard-working man and loving son who took care of his mother for as long as he could, even though he didn't know her age and they seemed to have a strenuous relationship. He also omits anything about the funeral in his defense. Marsal is ultimately found guilty of premeditated murder. As Marsal is ushered back to the van, which has been commuting him from court to the prison, the lawyer approaches him and is confident he can file and win an appeal. The next day, there is tension in the courtroom as Marsal is sentenced. He notices Marie is still smiling at him, but worryingly. The robotic man whom Marsal describes won't look him in the face anymore. Marsal is sentenced to death. He states, "I was to have my head cut off in a public square in the name of the French people." After this, Marsal is transferred to a new cell, which he starts to become very paranoid in. He thinks about his appeal and the certainty of his death. He recalls a story Maman told him about his father, who he never knew, going into town to see an execution. The scene caused his father to vomit the rest of the entire morning once coming home. Marsal says this behavior from his father disgusted him when he first heard of it. He couldn't understand why someone would want to see an execution, but now realizes they are the only thing that a man can truly be interested in. It seems he is so consumed with the idea of this, he can't get out of his mind. He is interested in savoring an execution and being on the other side of the crowd and not the one being killed. The thought of the guillotine makes Marsal shake and chatter. He thinks about the wonderful hope one could have if there was even a 1 in 1,000 chance a prisoner could be justifiably saved. The guillotine had no such chance. Even if the prisoner survived the first time, the blade would be raised and tried over and over. It was literally in the prisoner's favor to be murdered with no issues. He also laments about the machine being on the ground and not on a set of gallows. At least the raised scene of the gallows would be something to hold on to. In actuality, the guillotine would be placed on the ground and Marsal would die with no speciality. Marsal notes that prisoners are always taken away and executed at dawn. Because he does not want to be surprised by this, he sleeps during the day and stays awake waiting all night. He keeps track of every footstep and noise. Every time he hears the rustling of footsteps, he rushes to the door of his cell, finally finding something to care about in life despite how uncaring we saw him in the rest of the story. Marsal thinks of his appeal but is certain that it will be denied. He thinks about what he will do when he accepts this news. He realizes that everyone is going to die. He will too, no matter if it's right now or in 20-some years. Marsal still realizes he would be happy if he were somehow pardoned. Here we see the absurdist thoughts coming through the page here, where futility is reinforced through the certainty of death. Marsal also thinks about Marie and how long the days have been since she stopped writing. It seems Marie has moved on from Marsal. He thinks about how she must feel in the arms of a new man. He also realizes she could be dead or gone and he'd have no idea. One day the chaplain comes to Marsal's cell. The chaplain wants to know why Marsal keeps refusing to see him. Marsal has denied seeing him thrice. He keeps saying it is because he does not believe in God, which the chaplain does not understand. The chaplain reiterates that all men have turned to God in their hour of desperation here. Mersal retorts that he is not desperate but afraid. The chaplain continues, saying that he realizes every stone here sweats with suffering, but when even the most wretched criminals have looked upon them, they have seen a divine face emerge from the darkness. Mersal realizes his entire time here, the only face he ever saw staring back at him was Marie's and her flame of desire. Mersal continues to reject the chaplain's statements. The conversation is tiring him out. He is not certain of what he likes, but he is certain of what he doesn't like, and he has no time for God. The chaplain pities Mersal. The whole conversation, the chaplain becomes visibly more frustrated until he turns his back to Mersal for a long time. When he turns back around, he screams, "No, I refuse to believe you." The chaplain tries to tell Mersal he is on his side, but this upsets him even more. Mersal finally snaps and grabs the chaplain by the collar, screaming at him. Mersal realizes the absurd, the general indifference and insanity of the world. At the end of the day, he was no more or less guilty than his friends or anyone else involved. They were all condemned to die. What did it matter that he didn't cry at Maman's funeral? What did it matter Marie found solace in a new Mersal? Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he. Mersal is certain about his claim, but argues that the chaplain wasn't sure about anything, not even his own life. He yells all of these thoughts out at the chaplain. Not for long, however, as guards wrestle the chaplain away and he leaves with tears in his eyes. Mersal rests and finds acceptance in the general indifference of the world. He realizes it is similar to himself. He calls it a brother. He thinks and realizes no one had any reason to cry over Maman. In her last days, she likely realized the same thing, that she was free from it all and was ready to live as she pleased from the beginning. That's why she took a fiancé. Mersal feels happiness and hopes that the world acts in its natural way towards him. I had only wished that there be a large crowd of spectators that day of my execution and that they greet me with cries of hate. I guess I could write the chaplain's name on the board too, but I mean the story's over, and he's pretty much the exact same way as the magistrate anyways. I still have a lot of thoughts about this book, and I'm sure most of them aren't the true interpretation. To start, Camus doesn't really say if Mersal actually dies. If the book is supposed to be like a stream of consciousness type work, and not like a journal for Mersal, it can be sort of implied, because, you know, the thoughts end right after he accepts his death. There is a lot of talk about his appeal, and if he can still legally escape his scenario, and it upsets me a little that this never concludes. Granted, the whole book isn't really the legal battle for Mersal, but the journey he goes through mentally. Throughout the whole book, Mersal is basically just this white canvas, not really having any particular beliefs. He is able to be pushed around by people he likes and comes into conflict with the people he doesn't like. However, in his most desperate moments, he arguably does find happiness in the world outside of the prison and wants to live again, even though he will also have to face death again. So from that perspective, the book does conclude pretty perfectly. I also want to point out that despite Mersal being a rather uncouth character, he is the only person in the book who has some sort of character progression. Other than maybe Salamano, who goes from abusing his dog to not being able to abuse his dog, but still. In so many interactions in the book, the chaplain and magistrate with God, Raymond and his obsession to win against the Moorish woman, Marie and their relationship, Mersal runs into people who seem unable to compromise with their beliefs. Whenever an obstacle emerges, usually one provided by Mersal, they do some sort of mental gymnastics to ensure they are still right about the situation. In many ways, Mersal is a representation of the absurd itself, this outside force, a stranger, that barely ever sees eye to eye to people, and when they are confronted with him, they basically don't know how to respond. They typically just double down on whatever they were originally believing, even if this gets them nowhere. Only Mersal, with his ability to change and embrace the absurd, finds happiness. Is there anything else? I mean, yeah, he's uncaring, has trouble relating to people. Oh shit, he's autistic.